We have been looking at a series entitled Enjoy the Rest of Your Life, rest being in quotes because it's a concept in the Bible that comes from God and His created ability and how He has made us in His image and we reflect that image. And so therefore, if God rested, it makes sense that we learn to rest in various ways. And resting is a very, very broad field. It's not like just stopping from your work. It's more than that. It's where you put your confidence, where you put your faith, where you put the control, how you deal with anxiety and anger and all kinds of other things. So today, I've entitled the message, Rest from Anger and Control. I don't know about you. It may not show. I've been here long enough that there have been a few people who have seen me in my anger mode. Of course, usually your spouse sees you in your anger mode, or those closest to you, friends, relatives, people who are close. But we all have anger. Anger is a God-given emotion, and for the most part, it can be good. It doesn't have to be good. But I want to take you, first of all, to Christ, because Christ and God have perfect anger. So we know that it's an okay thing. It's okay to be angry. The question is, what do you do with that anger? You see in the media all the time now that people take their anger out in the wrong ways. Is it wrong to have anger? Not at all. Not at all. It's just like fear. It's just like sorrow. It's like any other emotion that God has given us. Anger is a normal, God-given emotion. And I want to show you one of the passages about Christ and His good emotion of anger. See, it's right for us to get angry at certain times. It's a matter of what you do with it. Mark chapter 3 and verse 1. Another time, Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse him. Jesus had been doing His ministry, and they didn't like the fact, the leadership, the religious leaders didn't like the fact that Jesus was gathering a following, and that might cut into their own following. There was a lot of jealousy, which is also a form of anger, I want you to know. So they watched Him closely to see if He would heal this man on the Sabbath, because that was part of the habit of Jesus. And you know, it was considered work in the Jewish mind by the Pharisees to do any kind of even good thing on the Sabbath. So healing would be an act of working, and they would condemn him for doing it on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." It's not like Jesus went quietly and said, "Okay, let's take care of this shriveled hand. You don't need to let anybody else see." Jesus wasn't that style. He's like, "Come on, stand up. We want everybody to see what God's doing here." And it was pretty impressive. Continue in Mark chapter 3 and verse 4. Then Jesus asked them, which is lawful on the Sabbath? You see, He read their mind. He knew that they were looking to accuse Him. So He said, here's a question. Is it lawful to do good or to do evil? To save life or to kill? But they remained silent. So He was challenging them. He looked around at them in anger. This is the expression of anger. And the word for anger there is orge in the Greek. And He was deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. And He said to the man, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians. This was a group of Herod's descendants and leadership. And there were various different groups. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin, the Herodians were more of a Roman governmental entity, not so much a religious entity. And they were plotting how they might kill Jesus. So the point of this passage is that Jesus was angry. When He overturned the money changers in the temple on 2 different occasions, He was angry and He took action, all right? And so anger is okay. The question is, what do you do with it? How far do you take it? And there are some legitimate areas, and we're going to look at that today, and some that are not so legitimate. As well, God the Father always has appropriate anger. Some people don't like the fact that God is an angry God. They want him just to be kind of a jellyfish, loving, everything is okay. But that's not God's character and nature, and we're made in his image, and it's not our character and nature. Go back to Psalm 30. We're going to look at the Psalms and the Proverbs for a little bit here. Psalm 30 verse 4 says, sing the praises of the Lord, you his faithful people. Praise his holy name. And one of the reasons for praise is this: for his anger lasts only a moment. Now this is by comparison, but his favor lasts a lifetime. So God takes great joy in demonstrating grace and favor. He doesn't take great joy in anger, but his anger is always justified because it's always targeted at our evil. It's always targeted at our failings, at our belligerence and stubbornness against God. Otherwise, God would never be angry. If we didn't have a fallen world, there would be no need for God to be angry. But it's still an okay emotion because he's angry at injustice. He's angry at unfairness. And aren't you, rightly so, angered at injustice, unfairness? Someone cuts you off in traffic. Instantly, you go into a rage, right? Well, that's wired into you. Now, if you run into the back end of them, then that's taking it too far. If you have this feeling that, wow, I'm really upset, I'm really angry, well, that's a normal God-given emotion because of lack of fairness. The word anger in the Old and New Testament means strong emotional reaction of displeasure, often leading to plans, this is the acting on it, for revenge or punishment. There are many words for anger in the Hebrew, and in the Greek there are several, but two of them, orge and thumos, are used more or less interchangeably according to the Baker Evangelical Dictionary of Bible Theology. So anger is a God-given emotion, just like sorrow is, just like sadness would be. Now, here's the way people, I've talked to a lot of people, there are and certain people groups are this way, and I don't want to stereotype too much, but there are, like if you came from an Italian background, you may not always be angry, but a lot of, anger is there and it's very expressive. There are other people groups. Dutch people have a reputation for being stubborn. I am a very, very stubborn person. My wife will say to me, when are you going to call the repairman? I can fix this. That's what I insist. And she shakes her head and she's like, no. It's time to call the repairman. And I am stubborn. I have been stubborn since I was a child. But anger, usually what happens is you identify anger with the explosiveness. When you blow up, when you yell, when you hit things, when you do all kinds of things that are out of line. But then there are people who implode in their anger. You'd never even know that they were angry. They're just kind of deep down, seething inside. I had a very, very close friend years ago, and this person said to me, I wouldn't be angry if you didn't make me angry. And I'm like, no, that's not exactly true. You choose to be angry in this situation. Nobody can make you angry. You say, well, wait a minute. Yes, they do. Well, they can trigger it, but what you do with it is your choice. And there are people who implode their anger, they push it down, and it ends up, by all outward signs, oh, this is a wonderful, nice, normal person. But then they start having problems with their internal organs. They have, heart problems. They have all kinds of other, with their liver and whatever. And guess what? They have pushed that anger. Now, I'm not saying every time someone has a heart problem or a liver problem or some medical problem, it's because of anger. But doctors will tell us it will affect you internally if you keep pushing that down and you don't find good ways. And I know people that pride themselves like, I'm not an angry person, but it's all down inside. And sometimes it's healthier if you just kind of explode in a reasonable way, not a dangerous way. Now I want to explain this thing of anger. I don't know if I've read this someplace, and if I'm taking credit for it from somebody else, I apologize. But this is something that I've thought for a long, long time. Anger is like a two-headed coin. The name of the coin is control. And if you flip that coin over, on the back side of that, and now when I say control, it's our need to control. Anger comes from our desire, our need to control our circumstances, to control our situation. And so if you look at the one side of the coin's name is control, but if you flip it over once, which I can't flip this here, you would see anger on the other side of this control coin. And then if you flipped it again, you would see worry and anxiety, because they are just other expressions of control. So the issue is not really anger. Anger is an emotion that goes along with it. Worry is an emotion, an activity that goes along with it. Anxiety is an emotion that goes along with it. But at the base, the name of this coin is I am trying to control something that's beyond what either I can control or God wants me to control. And so that's where worry and anxiety come from. You know, what did Jesus say about worry? We looked at it a few weeks ago. Don't worry about anything because, be responsible, but don't, sit there and wring your hands over things that you have no control. But what worry is an attempt, anxiety is an attempt to control the situation, to bring it, in, and you can trace so many phobias, and so many problems to this issue of I am trying to control this arena of my life. Is that necessarily wrong? No. Part of responsibility is setting controls and setting boundaries and setting limits. Jesus definitely did that in his ministry. You need to do that in your life. So anger, worry, anxiety, all part of the coin of control. And jealousy is the same thing. Isn't jealousy just a form of anger? Or pride. I'm jealous of what that person has. I want what they have, and it makes me angry. And what are you trying to do? You're trying to control either what that person has, or what you have, or you receive, or you go to God and you get angry and you say, God, it's not fair. That person has something and I don't have it. And that kind of jealousy has been since the fall. Cain and Abel, that's the story of that first murder in the Bible, is there was jealousy of Cain over Abel. Now, like I said, anger is a normal emotion of life. Nothing wrong with anger. But we need to learn to rest in the process of it. I'm going to take you back to Ecclesiastes, written by Solomon in chapter 5 and verse 15. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb. Now, this is a perspective that we need to get. And as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil that they can carry in their hands. In other words, you can't take it with you. This too is a grievous evil. In other words, this makes frustration in life. As everyone comes, so they depart. And what do they gain? It's a very pessimistic attitude. In fact, if you read the book of Ecclesiastes without reading, and we're going to look at this next week, if you read the book of Ecclesiastes written by Solomon, who had all kinds of wealth, all kinds of privilege, all kinds of things, if you read it and you don't read the last chapter, you're going to come away really depressed. You're going to say, what the heck is the point of living life? You live life on this horizontal plane and you gain a few trinkets and then you die and you can't take them with you. He says that's a short-sighted life. But he says this too is a grievous evil. As everyone comes, so they depart. And what do they gain since they toil for the wind? In other words, everything you work for could be in rubbles tomorrow. All their days they eat in darkness. In other words, there's just not a lot of positive stuff going on here. With great frustration, he's talking about the brokenness of humanity, affliction all around you, and anger. So it's a normal emotion of life. Everybody deals with it, and it's how you deal with it. And I want to give you some negative expressions of anger. And like I said before, they're fueled by our need to control. If we had no need to control, if we could perfectly turn everything over to God, we would get this little emotion of anger and we'd be able to deal with it right away. We'd put it in perspective. And that's what God wants to teach us how to do. And so if you go to Psalm chapter 37 and verse 8, some of these negative expressions and lessons here, the psalmist says, refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Now it's interesting because he says, do not fret. Well, what do you do when something makes you angry? You fret over it. You try to change it. You try to control it. And he says it only leads to evil. So he says, don't try to control it. Try to get God's perspective on it, and it will diffuse the anger. If you say, I don't need to control that, and we're going to see some other principles here. When you fret, it's a sign that you're trying to control a situation which should not be in your... And some of us are control freaks, right? I'm a big control freak. Take my wife to an amusement park. Put her on a Ferris wheel or something high that's mechanical. She tells me she can go out to the mountains, she can stand and look over a cliff, and she's fine. But she says if there's something that's mechanical, that's man-made, and I'm riding on it, and Matt and I used to freak her out because we love the rides, and we're like, come on, go on with us, go on with us. And she'd get up there, and she'd start to scream, and you know, the whole, you know, she hates it, she hates it. And one of the reasons she hates it is because she can't control what's going on. And so she starts to fret, we start to fret, and it's a sign that you're trying to control things. When you start to worry and fret over things, that's a sign you're trying to fix something in life that's sometimes beyond fixing, or you have no business fixing. And we all do it. Some are more control freaks than others, okay? Let me give you some principles for dealing with this issue of anger and control from the scriptures. First of all, let's focus on others, okay? Let's not worry about our anger, because that's not fun. Let's focus on those people who get angry toward us, because that's a lot more fun to focus on, right? And here's what it says, Proverbs 12:16. Fools show their annoyance at once. Fools show their annoyance at once, but the prudent overlook an insult. Now, what is it saying there? That someone who is foolish, they'll fly off the handle right away. They'll get annoyed with any little thing that they don't like, something they can't control, and they will impose it on you. Now, what do you do with an angry fool? 90% of the time, you overlook them. My wife is back there laughing because she's married to an angry fool. I knew that's where it was going, okay? Yeah, and sometimes we're very, very closely associated with an angry fool. And this is really talking about a biblical fool, someone who's they just don't follow God's ways, and they just live life on their own terms, and they get annoyed with everything. They're trying to control everything. They think they're above the law and everything else. But the prudent, the wise person, looks at that person and says, gee, that's a shame. I feel sorry for them. They may be insulting me, but I'm not going to get into a fight. I'm not going to return anger because it's not worth it. They're not worth it. You overlook an insult. Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 11. There's a lot in Proverbs. A person's wisdom yields patience. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense. So there's lots of times you can say, you know what? It's okay. There are some times you need to confront an offense because a person is just offensive and you need to set boundaries. But here it's saying that, you know what? It's to your glory to just sort of, when someone steps on your toes, okay, that's all right. That's the human condition. They're fallen. I'm fallen. It's okay. And you're going to see, we're going to look at a passage, love covers a multitude of sins. And, you know, if you love people the way God's instructed us and you get God's perspective, there's a whole lot of stupidity that can be overlooked, even our own. Proverbs 29:8, mockers stir up a city, but the wise turn away anger. There's a gift that wisdom has for turning away anger. And this is a great passage for today. You turn on the television, you see riots all over, and you can call them peaceful, but when you burn down buildings, that's not peaceful. Okay? When you destroy someone else's business and property, that is anything but peaceful. So I don't care what they're telling you, it's not peaceful. All right? There are peaceful protests. And there's every reason to do that because that's our right as American citizens. But people who come and they're mockers and they want to destroy, they will stir up a city. But people who have wisdom, people who have control of their anger, they'll turn these people away. Now, you can't always turn a mob away. The one thing about proverb isn't a promise. It's not a guarantee. You can't take it to the bank and say, okay, here, pay me the interest on it, because a proverb is a general statement of truth. 80, 90, maybe 50, 70% of the time, it generally works. Like, raise up a child in the way of their going. In other words, the Hebrew says, in their natural bent. Study the child, understand the child. And when he or she is old, they will not depart from that way. Well, we all know children who have been raised in Christian homes, consistent or not, and they have departed from the way. So it's a general truth. It is not a promise. You can't go to God and shake your fist and say, God, you know, I did A, B, and C, and now you said this would happen. Generally it does, not all the time, because that other person has a will. If they want to be angry, they can be angry. There's nothing you can do about it. Proverbs 14:29, whoever is patient has great understanding, but one who is quick-tempered displays folly. So there are principles for us to tuck away. Is it okay to be patient? You know what the problem with patience is? You have to give up control to have patience. That's a bugger. You have to give up control. You know, and you know the preachers and the congregation, the people who say, God, we're going to stand here and we're going to pray for patience and we want it now, right? It doesn't work that way. It's a learned process. But he says, the person who has patience has an understanding. They don't worry about the control thing. But if you're quick-tempered, you want to be in control. You want to be in charge. And it's a habit that's learned. When I work with young people who are very, very angry and explosive, and they're, you know, banging walls, and they're, you know, doing all kinds of things, it's a habit that has developed. That's their go-to approach. You know, Mom doesn't give me what I want. I'm 3 years old. Mom doesn't give me what I want. I'm going to throw myself on the floor, and I'm going to throw a fit. I don't know if I told you, my oldest daughter, we were in a store one time out in New Jersey, and she wanted something. You know, the impulse racks? You're coming out and all that. Boy, they put those there because they want you to buy, you know, some candy for the kids and stuff like that. And we were finished shopping, and, oh, she must have been 3, maybe 4. And she said, Daddy, I want that. I'm like, no, that's not part of what our plan is. We talked about what we're getting. We're just getting groceries. But Daddy, I want that. Next thing you know, she's on the floor throwing a fit. And that little kid was scooped up, taken out to the parking lot. And I said, you know what? You will not do that. We're going to walk back into the store and you're going to demonstrate your behavior in a positive way. But Daddy, I want that, I cry, I want that, I want that. You know, I don't care. And you know what? That's about the only time I ever remember doing that with her. I never had another problem in a store that I can remember after that because she learned that lesson. Whoever is patient has great understanding, but one who's quick-tempered displays folly. Proverbs 15:1, very famous one. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. So if you come back to someone with anger, you're going to get more anger. Now, generally, remember, it's a proverb. There are times when you can give someone who's angry a soft answer, and guess what happens? Man, they come back at you in spades. I mean, they are just all over you with their anger, and that's when you walk away and you ignore an insult. Proverbs 27:3. This is an interesting one. The Bible is so accurate in what it portrays. Stone is heavy and sand is a burden, but a fool's provocation is heavier than both. It's frustrating. Anger is cruel and fury overwhelming. But who can stand before jealousy? So what he's saying is jealousy is another form of anger. And things can turn and spin out of control. When you get angry, here's the principle. Love covers a multitude of sins. It's from the New Testament. Proverbs 30, this is the one that I wanted to get to, verse 33. For as churning cream produces butter, and as twisting the nose produces blood. How do you like that? You want to give somebody a bloody nose? Just kind of, all right? So in the same way, the proverb says, stirring up anger produces a riot, produces strife, produces a bad scene. So we talked about when others get angry, now about when you get angry about others. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 8. The end of a matter is better than its beginning, and patience is better than pride. Do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools. So in other words, don't explode or implode momentarily. Think it through. Take some time. Now I say all this and I'm a hypocrite because I get angry and it just kind of goes like that, and I have to work on it. Keep short accounts with anger. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 25. Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. Talking about the church here, and people getting angry at other people in the church. Verse 26, in your anger, do not sin. So you can be angry. It's a good, healthy emotion, and it's not sin, but it can become a sinful situation. How does that happen? How does it become a sinful situation? Somebody cuts me off for a parking place. Now, I keep in my trunk a pipe. It's not for protection. It's when you get out there and you get a flat tire and someone has tightened your lug nuts so tight with their air wrench that you cannot take that off. So you put that over the lug wrench, and it's about that long, and it's designed for me to break those lug nuts. However, let's suppose somebody cuts me off in a parking lot, and I get that pipe out of there and I go smash their windshield. Has my anger turned to sin? I would say so. I might even go to jail for that nonsense. But then I like this. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. Why? You need to keep short accounts with anger. Is it because the person that you're angry at is going to lie awake thinking, oh my gosh, they're angry at me, they're angry at me, they're angry? Probably not. They're going to fall asleep, they're going to have a restful night. Guess who's going to stay awake? You're going to toss and turn because of this anger, because you haven't let go of it. And do not give the devil a foothold, and that's the way when you hold on to a grudge. Grudges are such a waste of time. Again, it's a control issue. Anyone who has been stealing must steal no longer. He's talking about things that frustrate you and make you angry, that there are people who won't work. Now, it's okay if you can't work, but there are people who just won't work. and people who came out of this society there in the first century who, it's easier to steal than to work. And he says, you got to stop that. Because not only is it bad for you, it angers the rest of the culture and those people who are going to work. But must work instead, doing something useful with their hands, because it makes them feel good, it makes them productive. That they may have something to share with those in need. So, what takes care of some anger in our world is not only that you basically stop stealing, start working, and not only work not to be just selfish, but to share with others, to make a difference, an impact in someone else's life. And then you feel good about yourself, and then the anger starts to get better. Keep short accounts with anger. Bitterness, rage, and anger, again, are all control issues. Ephesians chapter 4, parallel passage, verse 31. He says, make a choice to get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, brawling, and slander. Can you imagine first century church fistfights breaking out? That's what he's talking about. Kind of brawling. And even slandering, Isn't gossip a control issue? Of course it is. Look, I can talk about you and put you down, and that makes me feel better than you, because I don't do what you do, right? That's the whole nature of slander and gossip. It's a control issue. I want to make myself look better than someone else. Along with every form of malice, again, that's anger. Instead, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving one another, just as in Christ God forgave you. So the principle to take care of this control is to turn around and forgive people, just like, did Jesus have a reason more than anybody on the planet not to forgive? Absolutely. He was perfect, and everything people did was an affront to him because of their evil. But he chose something different. So bitterness, rage, all of that. Colossians 3 is a parallel passage with Ephesians, verse 7. You used to walk in these ways, being angry, being controlling, brawling, in the way life you once lived. But now you must also rid yourselves of all such things as these. Now look at the list. Anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. The only time a person swears is when they're angry, when they want to express themselves. And, everybody does it from time to time. But the whole point is, he says it's connected to control and anger. Now, is it better to swear than to go punch someone? I would think so. Is it better to swear in your head than out loud? I would think so. Particularly if you're in a public place. I'm amazed at public speakers and some of the things they say these days that are just culturally inappropriate. And you'll see them on the news. And I'm like, are you kidding? They got to bleep that? Well, that's all coming from anger and a sense of wanting to control. Instead, he says, do not lie to each other, because the whole lack of truth, the whole lie is the basis for control, competition, jealousy. Why do we lie to each other? Well, either because we're ashamed of something, or we want to make ourselves look better than we are. Since you have taken off your old self with its practices, and you've put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator, Jesus Christ. Now we're coming to some of the solution for the control. Prayer is a good way to control anger and rest in God. And it is specifically addressed to the men. Do you think men commit more crimes than women do in our society and in our world? Do you think men are more angry in general than women are? Statistically, it's true. Okay? Women may express their anger in different ways, but men go out and they start wars. How many women in history have started wars? Not very many. A lot of men have. And prayer is a good way to control anger and to learn to rest in God. 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 8, therefore I want the men, addressing the men everywhere, these are spiritual men, to pray, lifting up holy hands without anger. Because if you're praying for your enemy, which Jesus tells us to do, how can you be angry at that enemy? If you're praying for their welfare. Now, I'm not talking about the imprecatory prayers of the Psalms where David said, get even with my enemies. All right? There's a time that's a pretty legitimate prayer. But he's saying, I want men everywhere, because men have a problem with anger, more so than women, lifting up holy hands without anger or disputing. And then he addresses the women. You may not like this passage, but it's there in the Bible. I want the women to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothes. Now, some preachers have taken this and said, don't you dare put makeup on, don't wear earrings, don't wear jewelry. That's not what it's saying. Do you realize the history in this context? There were women married to men who were very, very poor, and then there were other women in the culture who were rich, and they would get fancy hairstyles. They would get basically $1,000,000 expensive clothes and pearls and everything else. And what Paul is writing here, he's saying, women, you don't need to fill your lives and your hearts with things that are beyond your budget to feel good. That's a control issue. Some of it's out of anger, some of it's out of frustration, but it's a control issue. So he says, whereas men get angry, they need to pray, women need to stop worrying so much about their outward appearance. Nothing wrong with, being neat and clean and doing the best you can with yourself for men and women. But he says, not elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls to attract attention or expensive clothes, but with what? Good deeds. Appropriate for women who profess to worship God. We have some of the most beautiful women in this congregation, and they don't have a lot of money. Do you know why there's some of the most beautiful women in this congregation? Because of their heart, because of their deeds, because of the things they do. And they're an example to our younger people growing up. So prayer is a good way to control anger, both for men and women, and rest in God. And there are specifics about how men and women also control and deal with anger. Our anger, the Bible says, does not accomplish God's purposes. James, we're almost done. James chapter 1, verse 19. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Good verse to memorize. Because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. You will never accomplish God's purposes with your human expression of anger. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and evil that is so prevalent, and instead, humbly. What do you have to do to be humble? You're going to love this because it comes full circle. Give up control. If you're not humble, you haven't given up control. You're still trying to be in control instead of letting God in control. So he says, humbly accept the word planted in you, which can, and the word there is the concept of deliver you. It'll deliver you from anger. It'll deliver you from a shallow life. But it's all about control. Because our anger doesn't accomplish God's purposes, we need to humble ourselves before Him. Learning to rest from anger and control by following Christ's example. This is perhaps my favorite verse in all of the New Testament. I learned it many, many years ago when I was struggling with anger and control and resentment and a zillion other emotions that we all have. Best passage you'll ever read. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 20. But how is it to your credit? He's talking about Christians who are suffering. And he says, if you suffer because you're doing the right thing, that's one thing under the Roman government. But if you suffer because you're doing the wrong thing and you're being evil, then you deserve to suffer. So he says, but how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it? What good is that? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is commendable before God. Like, God, I'm doing the right thing, right? I really am. And I'm trusting in you. And he says that's commendable. To this you were called, to behave like that. Because Christ suffered for you, and here's the answer, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. Now here's the example of Christ. He was angry, he was frustrated, there was nothing wrong with that. He looked at the world and he grieved. But verse 22 is the answer. He committed no sin. In other words, he didn't take his anger to the point of sin. And no deceit was found in his mouth. He didn't go over to evil or take revenge. When they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When's the last time you've been insulted and said, you know what, I'm going to be like Christ, I am not going to retaliate? Most of us come back real quick, like, I'm going to win this argument. I'm going to deal with this thing. He did not retaliate. When he suffered, and he suffered unjustly, he made no threats. And this is the line. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. I love that passage. God, I don't have to take control of the situation because you've got control of it. I have to commit it to you. That's really what he's saying there. Jesus said, God the Father, you judge fairly. You know the score. You know everything. I don't need to take matters into my own hand. If Jesus wanted to blow up the universe, he could have done it instead of going to the cross. But he didn't, because God had a plan. And the anger of Jesus, if he carried it to the point of evil, would not have accomplished God's purpose, and you and I would not have forgiveness of sins and would not have the promise of heaven. So the next time you get angry, think about that. Entrust yourself to the Heavenly Father and say, God, you know the situation inside and out. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to do anything. Now, that doesn't mean you don't set boundaries. That doesn't mean when a fool gets angry at you, you don't stay away from that fool and not associate with him. That's okay. But when you're trapped in a situation, you entrust yourself to him who judges justly. How you express your anger really comes from the issue of control. And some of us are control freaks and we need to turn it over to God. I'm one. Every day I got to turn it over to God. So we're going to close with this and trust that you continue to rest in your anger, in your control, so that God has control of it.